everybody. Christina Previtt here. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. You guys probably know me from Jerry on Ice, the Friday version of PT on Ice, the Wednesday version of PT on Ice. I am switching hats to the fitness athlete division. So if you guys don't know, I am one of the faculty leads. I'm the lead faculty for the fitness athlete pregnancy and postpartum. And so when Alan and Mitch asked me to jump on this week, I was thinking that I would talk about return to weightlifting in the postpartum athlete. But then I thought, well, we haven't really talked about the sport of weightlifting in the Fitness Athlete podcast. And so what I thought we would do today is talk a little bit about the sport of weightlifting, how it is kind of different in regards to the way a competition or a meet is structured. And then we would talk a little bit about some of the variations in the pulls, because oftentimes in CrossFit, we don't do a ton of the drills around the way that we develop technical proficiency in the weightlifting movements in the sport of weightlifting versus kind of just some of the more gross motor patterns that we see in CrossFit. So first, the sport of weightlifting is a weight class sport. They actually just rearranged the weight classes last year because there were so many doping infractions in a higher level of competition in worlds and international meets. So there are now 10 weight classes for international meets and 7 weight classes for men and women for the Olympics. So right now they are in the quad to try and qualify for Tokyo 2020. And so there's a couple of US and Canadian athletes who are trying to really take a bid for Tokyo 2020. When you are competing in the sport of weightlifting, there is a 2-hour weigh-in. So you are in bra underwear or just underwear, and you have a weigh-in exactly 2 hours before the start of your meet. So you have to make that weight class. Then you have to declare what your openers are, and in weightlifting we lift in kilos, and that would be your opener. Once you have declared your opener, you are not able to go lower. So say you get onto the platform, you miss a lift, you actually aren't able to go back down, which I think is fairly common in some of the weightlifting events in a CrossFit type of competition as well. So you have to declare and you can't go down. So you're usually trying to find an opener in the snatch and the clean and jerk that you're pretty confident that you're gonna be able to hit, because the worst thing is to try and hit your opener and not hit it, and then the anxiety just starts to raise. So in the sport of powerlifting, they're in a flight just like in weightlifting, but in powerlifting, you go down the flight. So if you're third in a flight of 15, you are always going to be third. So you're gonna have 2 lifters before you, you're third, and then you go down the list. In the sport of weightlifting, if you were doing a snatch and you declared at 70 kilos, for example, 154 pounds, they would start from people who declared at 48, and then they would go 49, 50, 51, and you would go all the way up until they hit your opening weight. So the way that makes that a little bit different is that there's a little bit more of a technical aspect in terms of planning your warm-ups. So you have to count attempts based on the people that are around you to try and get an idea of when you need to get yourself warmed up to be able to take your attempt. The other thing that can happen is that within the first 30 seconds, so you have a minute to complete the lift, in the first 30 seconds, you're able to change your attempt. So in a more competitive level sport, what'll happen is someone will declare 70, you'll think that you have 2 attempts left, they will, in the first 30 seconds, push to 72, you will be pushed forward, and then you may have changed the timing of your attempts, and that can really start to throw you off, or it can affect you very mentally in the sport of, like in that competition day kind of sport mindset. In the competition day, you have 3 attempts to hit your total. So 3 attempts at the snatch, 3 attempts at the clean and jerk. So we always kind of talk about earning your total, where you have to hit your first 2 usually, and then you're kind of going for that PR attempt on the 3rd. So that's kind of the way that we run it. And oftentimes weightlifters, their PRs are what they have done on the platform. So as much as like what is happening in the gym is very important because it allows you to set up for competition, the one that's really important is when the pressure is on and what your total is in competition. I've been very fortunate that my last 2 snatch PR attempts were on the platform. And so my last 2 PRs were on the platform, and one of them I was actually 8 weeks pregnant. So we can talk about that next time. Okay, so when we're thinking about the 2 lifts, the snatch and the clean and jerk, with the snatch, we are going from the ground to overhead in 1 movement. The clean and jerk, we are going from the ground to our shoulders, shoulders to overhead in 2 movements. Unlike in CrossFit, where sometimes they'll say squat snatch or squat clean, it's actually just a snatch or just a clean, and the assumption is that you are always squatting unless you are saying that you are doing a power variation. So oftentimes if you're speaking with a weightlifter, a specific weightlifter versus a CrossFitter, that nomenclature, that verbiage is going to be slightly different. Okay, so I'm gonna try and give you guys a little bit of a demo. It's gonna be harder for people listening on the podcast, but I'm going to try my hardest to explain positions with the snatch and the clean and jerk. So the first thing, from a position perspective, I'm usually telling people that in order to not smoke your pubic bone, which I've done, it is painful, you want to make sure that while you're lifting your knees up, you're not seeing the bar move. If it is, that means that you're probably too high or too low. So if my hands are narrowed, you see how the bar is moving? So you want to make sure that it's really in that hip crease, that basically spongy part between the top over your pubic bone, but below your hip bone. So when we're talking about weightlifting, it is broken down into 3 pulls. So we have the first pull, which is coming from the floor into the point where you are making contact with your body, which with the snatch is going to be in the hip, but with the clean and jerk is going to be mid-thigh. So first pull is you're bringing it up to the hip. Second pull is from where you're making contact to where you are hitting triple extension. So you're trying to get your knees, your hips, and your toes plantar flexed to get that max upward movement. And then the third pull, which oftentimes can get neglected, and part of I think the thing that I'm correcting most on CrossFitters is the third pull where you are actively pulling your body underneath the bar. So most people kind of will think that they have to just whip it and pray that it hits the right spot, but you really are actively pulling underneath the bar in order for you to be getting that active shoulder position in the snatch, or that very strong upper back position for the clean. And it's also about placing your body in the right spot in order for you to land that technically well. So when we're thinking about some of the variations in weightlifting, with CrossFit we tend to have the strength portion be either hang snatches, power snatches, or from the floor. But with people who are in the sport of weightlifting, there's a lot of different variations of the movements that we will do in order to train different parts. So we have movements from the floor and movements from the hang. So if we're from the hang, we're kind of coming from above the knee into this contact point where we're trying to look at different ways that we can create positional strength. So if people are having trouble in that transition from the first pull and the second pull, they'll probably have a lot of hang position work. So if they're having trouble from the floor, they're fine, but they're having trouble like losing their position as they're trying to transition into the hip, I'll be programming a lot of hang variation work to see if we can kind of fix that strength. Then we'll do a lot of work from the hip. So this gets rid of a lot of the acceleration from the floor. So now when you're in the hip, you're pretty much just doing this little bounce and coming underneath, working on being very active in that third pull position and getting your body underneath the bar. The next way that we would train that is with a tall variation. So it's probably hard for you to see, but from a tall variation, we're actually starting in this triple extension position. So you're on your toes, your body is extended, and then from there, you're just gonna try as hard as you can to drive underneath the bar in order for you to be very active in that third pull. So full variations are obviously going to be important because they translate to sport. If you're having problems in terms of maintaining your position from above the knee into the second pull, oftentimes this is when athletes get too far back behind them. Instead of allowing their shoulders to be slightly in front of the bar, we would be working on hang position work. If you are having trouble staying active in that third pull, so what tends to happen is these athletes will start getting really soft in their shoulders, or they'll start experiencing this early arm bend underneath the bar, which is okay in CrossFit, but when you get into the sport of weightlifting, as soon as you have any sort of jarring happen through the shoulder or through the elbow on either the snatch or the jerk, it's considered a no lift for a press out. So if you're having a hard time staying active or driving your body underneath the bar, then you're going to be using a lot of hip and tall snatch variations. I often like using hip and tall snatch variations as well for athletes who tend to swing the bar. Oftentimes people are told to slam the bar against their hips or really aggressively hip thrust, and what that can do is it can create a very horizontal bar path instead of thinking that that contact point is to drive that little bit of momentum and almost cue the athlete to start allowing that initiation of elbow bending in order to keep the bar path very vertical and allow the bar to come close to you so that you're landing with the bar in the middle of your body. So those are some of the variations that we'll work on, and the same thing can happen in the clean. For the snatch, the other two variations that are used a lot is the overhead squat and the snatch balance. So instead of starting with the bar in front of you, you're starting with the bar on your back, hands are in a snatch grip, and you're almost doing like a push press into an overhead squat for the snatch balance. So you're bending, pressing, and coming up underneath. Sometimes we use this for positional strength. So if you're having a hard time with shoulder stability, driving your body underneath the bar, staying very active is going to be important. And oftentimes, depending on the athlete, they may be able to snatch balance about 10% to 15% more than they're able to snatch. Some are a little bit less, some are a little bit more. Mine is very close, within 5 kilos. My max snatch is 74 kilos, 163, and my max snatch balance is 80 kilos, 176. So very, very close. So a different way to start gaining positional strength, because you need to have the shoulder stability in the bottom position of the snatch in order for you to be having that active shoulder position and be able to make the lift. Okay, so all of those different variations outside of the snatch balance and the overhead squat can transfer into the clean and jerk. Clean and jerk, we're looking more at max strength than max technical strength, because oftentimes we see between a 10 to 15% difference between the max clean and the max front squat. And then the two things that are probably going to be very different from a technical perspective is when we would be using some of the jerk variations. So oftentimes they'll call it a power jerk, or in CrossFit they use the term push jerk, where you're not splitting your feet, you're kind of coming underneath the bar by moving your feet from a standing position to a squatting position, not a starfish position, trying to bring your feet from just under your hips to just outside your shoulders. So that is a push jerk position. Sometimes people who don't have the most hip stability or pelvic stability feel stronger in a push jerk than a split jerk. From a CrossFit perspective, it is faster to cycle a barbell with a power jerk than a split jerk, obviously, just because of the way that you can barbell cycle and come down. But you're thinking that with the push jerk, you're keeping your body nice and tall, shoulders are out in front of you, and you're almost trying to toss the bar and then come underneath. So stay nice and strong through the midline and coming up straight, versus a split jerk where you're letting your front foot and your back foot come to allow your body to drive under the bar. So when you're thinking about the variation of the jerk, you're not thinking that you're driving up against the bar. You're thinking that you're driving your body underneath the bar in order to get that less amount of range of motion that your body needs to press up with their shoulders, but also to allow the weight to transfer into the hip to allow that transfer up. Oftentimes, different variations that we'll use is pause dips. So this seems like it's nothing, but you'll heavily load the bar and then allow your body to just dip with heavy weight. And the reason why we do that is when you're tired on your third attempt of a clean and jerk, it is going to feel like the bar is very, very heavy on your chest, and it can make you really nervous in order to bring the bar over the head with the amount of speed and aggression that you need to in order for you to get the bar overhead successfully. So if you're used to having 120% of your clean on your front rack, then you can mentally get used to having this weight there. And so they'll do pause, dip, doubles, or triples in order to reinforce those positions. So if you're working with a weightlifter, the only other two variations that we'll use, so we talked about first pull, second pull, third pull. We talked about from the floor, from the hang, from the hip, and tall. So different positions coming from the floor to overhead. The other, we've talked about snatch balances and tempo overhead squats to develop positional strength. The other things that we'll work on in weightlifting, I'm sorry, I am word vomiting a whole bunch of information on you, but if you have any questions about any of these positions, just shoot me a message and we can talk about this more, is no contact and no feet. So no feet, we're starting to work on positional strengthening so that you're not, I use a lot of no feet variations where I get people who are like donkey stomping as they're trying to jump from a jumping position underneath the hips to a squatting position. You don't need to do this big pull of the feet. Sometimes people say to hear your feet because you want to be aggressive in that move out, but what ends up happening is we get this like donkey stomping where you're actually wasting a lot of energy trying to move from a standing position to a squatting position. So I'll use no feet variations to try and get you to develop strength from the hip instead of really relying on that change of position from the feet or the standing position to the squatting position. So if you're trying to do a no feet snatch, your feet are in a squatting position already, and then you can come underneath the bar without allowing your feet to move. The other one that I work on for the vertical bar path is using a no contact variation. So what can happen is if you were told to slam the bar, you almost do this like kettlebell swing overhead instead of keeping the bar nice and close to you. So if you have to do a no contact variation, it's coming nice and close, but it's not making contact with me. So I have to stay even more vigilant about keeping a vertical bar path. So those are some of the correctives that I'll do for any of my athletes who are having trouble with that type of position work. So I hope you guys found that really helpful. The next time I'll come on, I'm starting to get out of breath by talking with a barbell all the time. The next time I come in, I'll talk about how I use these variations in order to help CrossFit and weightlifting athletes in the postpartum period get back into what they're into their sport, because we can manipulate some of these variables to allow a reduction in impact on the pelvic floor to allow them to begin getting back into sport and reinforcing positions. So use this as kind of the foundation. The next time I'll come on, I'll talk about some of these variations in regards to the postpartum athlete, and we will go from there. So I hope you guys found that helpful. I can geek out about weightlifting all day. If you guys are interested in the clinical management of the fitness athlete, pregnancy, and postpartum, we are just finishing up our first cohort, but our second cohort starts September 9th, and we are already over halfway full. So if you guys are interested in jumping onto that 8-week online course, I encourage you to do so. Otherwise, I will see you guys soon, and we will talk about returning to weightlifting for the postpartum athlete. Bye, guys.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.